Yo, what's up everyone? My name is Yura and welcome back to the month of Meadowlands. Today we are covering a deck that is honestly one of the main reasons I started the month of Meadowlands in the first place. And that's kind of weird to say about a deck that is like not at all even remotely historically relevant to this time period in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, but I really love Scrap. This deck is not good until we get Scrap Factory, unfortunately, but I personally like it quite a lot. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of the big reasons is I just really like these cards. I played World Championship 2011 at some point, like a couple of years ago at this point, and I really fell in love with the Scrap cards. I think they're really fun to play around with. I think their gimmick is really interesting, even though it is kind of clunky to play around without Factory. I do think this deck has a lot of really interesting pieces to it that enable a very fun synchro strategy. So we're going to go through this. I am going to yap about why I think this deck is so interesting and so cool to me. And honestly, I hope I can inspire some other people to, if anything, just, you know, give your pet decks a little bit more of a try in a format like this. I think it's a lot of fun. I'm not going to go ahead and call this week of the month of Meadowlands like the pet deck week, because there are some decent decks that we are going to be talking about. But to me, this week is just like a way for me to talk about some of the decks that I have been thinking about for a long time. And Scrap is absolutely one of them. Scrap is arguably the rogue deck that I have spent the most time trying to build. Not in like how many times I've actually been in the deck editor with it, but like for how long I've been trying to make this deck work. Because you'll notice in this video, we have a Meadow Scrap V2 up here, which is significantly less than something like, not Windup, I think it was Inzektor who had a V5, and something else also had a V5. I think it was maybe X-Saber. But in terms of like an overall time period, this is one of the first rogue decks I tried to make function in Meadowlands. And, well, I say rogue decks. This is one of my first pet decks from Meadowlands, and it is really special to me for a couple of reasons. Mainly because of Scrap Dragon. I know I've been kind of sitting here yapping about nothing, like not anything to do with the deck, but Scrap Dragon is the reason why I love this deck so much. And there's a couple of reasons for that, specifically as it pertains to Meadowlands. Scrap Dragon is like the synchro out to a lot of things in this format. While this deck does absolutely struggle into something like Ophion, and it really does not have a great out to it outside of trying to go for like Chimera into Beast to make a rank 4, that is still something that you can do, and it, at the very least, is like un-out. But the reason I like Scrap Dragon so much is because this is a relatively easy to access synchro monster that pairs super nicely with Instant Fusion, and its effect is incredibly relevant in this format, being able to blow up any problematic card on your opponent's field, whether that be an Abyss Gaios, a random Floodgate that your opponent has active, just a monster that you want to out that you don't want to out by battle. Scrap Dragon is phenomenal. Really sick card, a really great stat line, and genuinely phenomenal effects. I say effects plural because we are playing Scrap, so we do actually get to make use out of that secondary effect that it has when it dies. But much like all of my deck profiles, we're going to start with the card by card and move from there. That said, I am going to start with the Scrap cards first and then go into some of our tech choices and our generics, because I think it's just going to make more sense as I go through it like that. So we're going to start off on the star of the show in Scrap Chimera. Chimera is your main normal summon, and that's mainly because of its main effect. Chimera as a level 4 Earth Beast. That beast is important. These are not machines, they are beasts, which is good and bad for a handful of reasons. But Scrap Chimera specifically reads, this card cannot be used as a synchro material monster except for the synchro summon of a Scrap monster. We do actually have a handful of these that are worth it. I am not currently playing all of them, but there are some decent ones. And additionally, all other materials must be Scrap monsters. When this card is normal summoned, you can target a Scrap tuner in your graveyard and special summon that target. So a couple of things about Chimera. Its reborn is unfortunately a little limited. There are not a lot of scrap tuners. If you move your eyes over to the right side of the screen here with the card pool, if I just search by scrap tuners, we have a level 5, which I'm going to be honest, I did not know we had. I did not know this card existed. I don't think it's very good, but I forgot it. I legitimately forgot about it. Orthros, which we are on 1 copy of. Beast, which we are on 3 copies of. This is your main tuner. Goblin, which we are on 1 copy of because it has some niche applications. And we're going to talk about all these cards a little bit more as we get to them. And then we also have Worm and Mind Reader. We are not playing the 5, the 2, or the 1. I don't really feel a need to play these cards, especially the 2 and the 1, because your main non-tuner is the Chimera. And if I go to Scrap and scroll down to their Synchro monsters, you'll notice we have a 10, a 9, an 8, and a 7, and we cannot utilize Chimera as our non-tuner for any of these if we are using the level 1 or level 2 tuners, because that would make a 5 or a 6, and Chimera has that restriction on it that says all the materials must be scrap monsters, and it can only make scrap monsters. Notably, this restriction does not apply to Xyz monsters. This is only synchro locking. So you can use Chimera to reborn like an Orthros or a Beast, and then go into a rank 4 of your choice after that, and that is totally fine. This is great for pairing alongside Instant Fusion if your Chimera gets negated or something like that. You can use Instant Fusion as a backup plan to then go into like a Cowboy to out something, or a Black Ship of Corn to out something, or a Lavalval Chain to set up for next turn. There's a lot that can be done here with just a Chimera that is baiting out an effect and then use some other means to extend a little further. Granted, I say that, but this deck does have a bit of a difficulty actually keeping its resources on board, and we're going to talk about why in just a second. But before we get to that, I want to talk about Scrap Beast. So Beast is the other main card of the deck. This is your main tuner monster, whereas the Chimera is your main non-tuner. Beast is a 4-star Earth Beast tuner, which is a phenomenal level for a tuner that is not restrictive. Honestly, it's really interesting having the restrictions on the non-tuner as opposed to the tuner, because if you go and look at something like Debris Dragon, which is also a level 4 tuner, Debris Dragon is the tuner and it has restrictions on it instead of the non-tuner having restrictions on it. So Scrap Beast being a tuner with no restrictions and Scrap Dragon being generic materials means that a normal summon of Scrap Beast can combo alongside a lot of cards to make a decent synchro summon. The main targets for us are going to be the Photon Thrashers and our Instant Fusions, but that's all just like the super types of Beast. Beast does actually have an effect, and I'm gonna be honest, it's a little weird to make work, and that's for a few reasons. So Scrap Beast reads, if this face-up defense position card is targeted for an attack at the end of the battle phase, destroy this card. If this card is destroyed by the effect of a scrap card and sent to the graveyard, you can target a scrap monster in your graveyard except Beast and add that target to your hand. So Beast is going to be your main way of recycling your Chimeras using that last effect. The problem with Scrap Beast's effect is that first part. So unlike Goblin, which we're going to touch on pretty shortly, Scrap Beast, while in defense position, does not have the protection from battle. So in order for Scrap Beast to blow itself up by its effect, you need to have your opponent functionally walk into it on their own while reading the card. And it's also like a 1300 defense point monster. Like, this is not a card that is going to really stick around on a board really frequently, and the only way that it will is if you're backing it up with something like a Mirror Force or a Dimensional Prison. And maybe that's an argument to be playing Dim Prison instead of some of the other trap cards that were on in here. I could very well see it over maybe the Call of the Haunted, but Call of the Haunted does have some really nice applications in this deck, so I'm hesitant to cut it. But back to Beast, that ladder effect does have other ways of triggering it, and One of the main ways that you can trigger it is by utilizing an already summoned Scrap Dragon, which will not only out something on your opponent's board, but will also fetch you a normal summon for the following turn. We have another way of utilizing this in Scrap Storm, which we're going to get to when we touch on the spell cards, but just know that finding Scrap Beast is really important, and it is the tuner of choice for this deck because it plus Chimera does equal your best synchro monster in Scrap Dragon. And it's a little weird to say that it's your best synchro monster because it is not the highest level Scrap synchro monster. You'll actually notice we're not on Atomic Scrap Dragon because if I'm going to be so real with y'all, that card is ass. That card is giga uber ass. And I guess I could talk about why it is when we get to the extra deck, but for right now, just know that we're not on it. The other tuners that we're on in our main deck for the scraps are one copy of Scrap Orthros. This is a level 4 Earth Beast tuner, much like Beast is, and this card cannot be normal summoned or set. Instead, it must first be special summoned from your hand while you control a scrap monster. If summoned this way, target a scrap monster you control and destroy that target. If this card is destroyed by the effect of a scrap card and sent to the graveyard, you can target a scrap monster in your graveyard except for Scrap Orthros and add that target to your hand. So very similar to Beast, this card's final effect is a recycle for any scrap monster in your graveyard. So this is another way of getting your chimeras to board. This is a great way of getting a Beast back into rotation if you have like an instant fusion in hand or something of the sort. But Orthros is a little more difficult to field. This card does nothing on its own. If you only open Orthros and no other scrap monsters, this card is functionally dead. But it is a searchable monster method of actually proccing your scrap monster's destruction effects, which is really nice. Additionally, it can be recycled out of the graveyard being a scrap monster, so if you already have a Chimera in rotation or something of the sort, you can instead just go get an Orthros, which will then be able to pop some random scrap monster that you have just sitting around on your board. This is a great way of setting up like Beast and then tagging out the Beast for a Chimera for next turn. A lot of this deck is focused on this kind of core loop of, do I have access to a Chimera next turn? That is kind of the core tenet of this strategy is, can I access Chimera on every single turn? Because if you do, eventually the idea is that your opponent is going to run out of answers for the Chimera eventually. We've got 2 more scrap monsters to cover before we get into our generics. So the first one that we're going to cover is the Scrap Goblin. This is the newest addition to the deck. It's been kind of in and out for a while. And Scrap Goblin is pretty simple. Goblin is a level 3 Earth Beast warrior, not a beast, which is important, and a tuner. This card cannot be destroyed by battle. At the end of the battle phase, if this face-up defense position card was targeted for an attack, destroy this card. If this card is destroyed by the effect of a scrap card and sent to the graveyard, you can target a scrap monster in your graveyard, except itself, and add that target to your hand. So, it still has that scrap recycling effect, but this card, unlike Orthros or Beast, does actually have that effect where it cannot be destroyed by battle. This is immensely important for both surviving a turn and also for actually making use out of its on-field self-destruction effect, because that will count it as having being blown up by a scrap card, unlike Beast, which is more often than not actually going to be able to proc it. This is the main reason why I'm actually on Goblin, because in a world where your Scrap Dragon gets outed, you want to use Scrap Dragon's recycling effect to get something to the board that will be able to proc its recycling effect, so you can then get into that core tenet of Scrap, which is recycling a Chimera for next turn. Reborning a Beast can't really do that because Beast is so vulnerable to just being destroyed by battle, and if that happens, your resource loop is broken. That said, Goblin is still kind of an undesirable monster, mainly just because of its level. We do have a level 7 Scrap Synchro, but it's a vanilla in Scrap Archfiend, so even though it's a big monster, it functionally isn't relevant, and that's the main reason why we're not on it. Instead, our main 7 target for this deck is the best 7 in the format in Black Rose Dragon. Goblin, I do still think, deserves its spot in this deck. Having access to Scrap Dragon to reborn something that can't be destroyed by battle is great at fending off death, and also, again, does recycle you into your scrap chimera, which is really important. The final scrap monster that we're on in the main deck, and I'm honestly not even too sure about this one, is Scrap Golem the Fridge. It's not a bad card. I want to get out ahead of things and say this is not a bad card. Golem is, in theory, a way to easily access the level 9 Scrap Synchro in Scrap Twin Dragon without specifically needing to utilize something like Instant Fusion plus a normal summoned Scrap Beast. Scrap Golem as a level 5 Earth Rock monster, again, not a beast, which is important for a reason that we'll get to shortly, can, once per turn, target a level 4 or lower Scrap monster in your graveyard and special summon that target to either player's field. There are some very cute things that you can do with this card. We're currently just kind of using it as a higher leveled chimera, but if you wanted to get a little silly with it, you could, in theory, summon Scrap Searcher to your opponent's field and use it as a nuke. Scrap Searcher is a level 1 winged beast non-tuner that reads, when a scrap monster you control except itself is destroyed and sent to the graveyard while this card is in your graveyard, you can special summon this card from your graveyard. When this card is special summoned, destroy all face-up monsters you control except scrap monsters. The reason why this combos so well with the Fridge is because of the Golem being able to summon any scrap monster that is level 4 or lower to either player's field. And Scrap Searcher's on summon nuke effect is not when summoned by its own effect, it's when it's special summoned at all. We are not currently on it, but again, if you wanted to try to make space for it, I think you totally could. This card is incredibly funny. It is a really unique way of outing a board, and if you find a way to make it work, absolutely please do let me know. This is one of those decks where I am absolutely always looking for ways to improve it because I do love playing it that much. We do have a couple of generics rounding out the rest of our monster lineup, though. In the double Summoner Monks, we are on a good handful of spells, and also Summoner Monk into Scrap Beast does just make a Scrap Dragon, which is pretty nice. We're on 3 copies of Photon Thrasher for very similar reasons. It's just a really solid 4 extender, and that combos really nicely with both the Scrap Dragons, the Instant Fusions, and the Scrap Beasts. And overall, it's just a fine card. The final monster that we're on in the main deck, though, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video at all, is the Green Baboon Defender of the Forest. This card is the reason why it's important that these cards are beast for the most part instead of machines. Now, don't get me wrong, there are cards that we could be playing if these were actually machines, namely Gear Gigan X, Machina Gear Frame. Like, there are certainly cards that are arguably better than the monkey here, but like, this is a very, very funny card to be playing in this deck. I actually like it quite a lot. It's a very, very funny bomb to drop on someone. That said, Green Baboon, before I get ahead of myself, is a level 7 Earth Beast monster that reads, if this card is in your hand or graveyard, when a face-up beast-type monster you control is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, except during the damage step, you can pay 1,000 life points and special summon this card. So, one of the things that we're going to get to when I talk about the spell cards is this general problem that Scrap has of keeping board advantage. A lot of their cards rely on specifically things like Orthros and Scrap Storm, rely on actually blowing up your own monsters to utilize their recycling effects to make sure that you get access to Chimera. But where does that leave you if it's the first turn of the game and all you have access to is Beast plus Storm? Normally, that would leave you with nothing. You would have a Chimera in hand, which is fine for next turn, but you would have nothing left on your board because you already used your normal summon and one of your main quick plays to get that resource loop online. So instead, what we're doing, and this is one of the main reasons why we're on the Photon Thrashers as well, is Green Baboon, when you blow up your scrap monsters, which you're going to be doing a lot of because that's the whole gimmick of the deck, can summon itself by paying like a life point cost. But this is a really decent body blocker. It's a really decent attack stat. It's unfortunately not a great level, but honestly, it's fine. The main purpose of it is just to make sure that we do not like die immediately on our opponent's turn 2. And it's not guaranteed, like it's still kind of a weird card to find, but it being able to summon itself out of either hand or graveyard is really nice for trying to keep board presence up. And while it's not perfect, it is a card that I have really been enjoying messing around with. That said, we are going to leave the monsters behind real quick and talk about our spell lineup. I'm going to go through the generics first because we've talked about them so many times already. I don't really feel like I have too much of a need to cover all of them. So we're on 3 copies of Instant Fusion, a Heavy, a Dark Hole, a Reborn, and a Foolish Burial, alongside 3 copies of MST. And then onto the traps, we also have the Warning, the Judgment, Double Call the Haunted, Double Mirror Force, and Double Bottomless Trap Hole. And that just leaves us with the 2 scrap-related spell cards, that being Scrap Yard, which is a normal spell card that allows us to search out any scrap tuner from our deck to our hand, which is pretty nice, and Scrap Storm, which is all in one, a way to trigger your scrap monster's recycling effects, a draw, and Foolish Burial for scrap monsters. So pairing Scrap Storm alongside a Scrap Beast functionally reads Bin Scrap Chimera, blow up Beast, and draw a card replacing the Scrap Storm. Then Beast will trigger to get the Chimera out of graveyard, leaving you with a pretty set up hand and graveyard for the following turn to go into a Scrap Dragon off just a single normal summon, which granted is a little bit of a higher stake than, you know, some other decks can just do that relatively easily. But this is our gimmick and this is what we have to work with. And honestly, I actually like it a lot. I think this is a very, very cool resource loop, and genuinely, I have so much fun with it. On to our extra deck, we're going to start off with the Instant Fusion targets. We're actually on 3 of them here. The one of Cybersaurus, because using our level 4 tuner and its level 5 non-tuner, we can go into a Scrap Twin Dragon, which we're going to talk about shortly. A Carbonala Warrior as a level 4 target, and a Fusionist as a level 3 target that can get us into a Black Rose Dragon. Could, in theory, run a Gaia Knight, the Force of Earth here in the level 6 slot, but I'm going to be honest, I don't really see the need to, and we don't really have the space for it in the extra deck. On to the real stars of the show, though, we have our Synchro Pool. We're going to start off with Scrap Twin Dragon, which, despite being the higher level Scrap monster, is arguably not as good, despite the fact that it is definitely still a phenomenal card. So Scrap Twin Dragon is a level 9 Earth Dragon Synchro that requires a Scrap Tuner and a non-tuner monster. Once per turn, you can target a card you control and 2 cards your opponent controls, destroy the one you control, and if you do, return the ones your opponent controls to the hand. If this card in your possession is destroyed by your opponent's card and sent to the graveyard, you can target a non-synchro scrap monster in your graveyard and special summon it. So, the reason why I say this card is not as good as a regular Scrap Dragon mostly has to do with its level. Getting a level 5 and a level 4 on board is a little awkward without utilizing exactly the Fridge or the Instant Fusion, but don't let that deter you from the fact that this card is really good. A double bounce and the opportunity to trigger your own scrap monsters is genuinely phenomenal. It also can trigger your green baboons in hand or graveyard, which is a great way of pushing for game. Generally, just a really, really phenomenal card. I love both twin and regular Scrap Dragon so much. We are actually going to talk about Scrap Dragon next because they are very similar to each other. Scrap Dragon is the level 8 version of the Scrap Synchro Pool, and this card is fully generic in its materials and reads, once per turn you can target a card you control and a card your opponent controls, destroy them. When this card in your possession is destroyed by your opponent's card and sent to your graveyard, you can target a non-synchro scrap monster in your graveyard and special summon that target. There's a reason we're on 3 of this card. You do go through that many over the course of a game because the goal, again, is to make as many Scrap Dragons as physically possible. This card is your bread and butter. It is one of your main ways to proc your scrap recycling effects. It's phenomenal at outing boards, and it's just generally a really good statted monster. Same thing with Scrap Twin Dragon. These are both very, very good cards. The rest of our Synchro Pool is just kind of some generics that are really solid in the format, like the Crimson Blader and the Stardust Dragon, and then of course the already mentioned Black Rose Dragon. Our Xyz pool is fairly bog standard, just a handful of rank 4 monsters that do the job pretty nicely. We're on a Black Ship of Corn. No real reason to play a Diamond Direwolf because we have 3 Scrap Dragons. I guess you could run it to try and out Ophion, but I don't really know if it's necessary. I do kind of prefer Black Ship of Corn in this specific scenario, just to out like Zen Mains and Maystrokes, which are otherwise a little annoying. But I could totally see this swapping out for Diamond Direwolf. I'm not going to say like it's bad. This is currently where I'm at. We're also on 1 Maystroke, just in case something goes terribly wrong. 1 Lavalval Chain to both graveyard setup and stack things to the top of our deck. 1 Abyss Dweller for graveyard decks, and 1 Gaga Cowboy to run over bigger monsters. Onto our side deck. I'm actually not fully certain on this. I've actually changed it up fairly recently. We're on the 3 copies of Maxi, the 3 copies of Valor. I think this Valor could maybe be something else, but I'm not really sure what it would be yet. 3 copies of Lightning Vortex, 3 copies of Mind Crush, and 3 compulsory evacuation devices. Before we get into games, I do want to really quick talk about why we're not playing Atomic Scrap Dragon. And if I'm going to be honest, it's actually relatively easy to see why. Atomic Scrap Dragon is a level 10 Earth Dragon Synchro that requires a Scrap Tuner and 2 or more non-tuner monsters. That is kind of the problem with this card, is that making it is really damn weird. Your main tuners and non-tuners are 4s, and sometimes you can flex it into 5s with like Instant Fusion or Golem. But to make it 10, you'd need to go like 2 3s and a 4, which is just really awkward to do in a deck like this. Not to mention the fact that I think Atomic Scrap Dragon's actual effect is just actively worse than the rest of them. Atomic Scrap Dragon, whereas Twin and Scrap Dragon deal with monsters on your opponent's board, Atomic Scrap Dragon is a triple shuffle into deck from the opponent's graveyard, which feels a little strange. Like, I don't know why we're doing graveyard interruptions on a card like this when the Twin and the Scrap Dragons are both dealing with cards on the field. So I'm going to be honest, I don't really know. I'm not really sold on this card. I think a lot of it is just bad, and I don't really have much of a reason for not wanting to play it other than I think it's bad. The other card that you could, in theory, run is something like Scrap Lube. My issue with Lube is that it is not good. The problem with Lube is that it restricts you from going to your battle phase the turn you activate it. And it's also like a continuous spell reborn, which does end up meaning that like it and your monster will die to MST. Although granted, depending on what you reborn, that is actually fine, because if you reborn like a beast or an Orthros with this, you do still get the beast effect, which isn't terrible, and it can proc Green Baboon, but overall, I don't know if it's worth it too much. But I have yapped for a pretty long time about this deck already for a deck that is certainly not tiered, so I think I've talked quite enough. Let's see the deck in action. All right, so we're pairing Scrap into Dragoonity today, and our opening hand is looking a little bit better than theirs. They do have that Judgment, which is pretty nice, but the rest of this hand isn't super ideal. Cards of Consonance for a Phalanx is not the end of the world, but honestly, the rest of this hand is not exactly things you want to see in your opener, unless you're finding Zephyros alongside Dragon Ravine, which they have not done. We have opened a copy of Foolish Burial, Scrapyard, Instant Fusion, Scrap Beast, and Call of the Haunted into our opponent, who is going first. They're going to find at the top a copy of Warning, and then use the card's consonants to draw 2, getting themselves a copy of Phalanx and Aquas, using the Aquas to get a Levitant field, and then setting both Solemns. We're going to find an Instant Fusion off the top and go this copy of Foolish Burial to get a Green Baboon into the graveyard. We're going to go to the Scrapyard after normal summoning a copy of Scrap Beast, and then going this Instant Fusion for a Carbonella Warrior, and then going down this copy of Orthros to trigger our Green Baboon in the graveyard, which is going to eat this copy of Warning. We are then going to synchro off into a copy of Scrap Dragon, which is going to eat that Judgment, and then we're going to trigger the Scrap Dragon to reborn a copy of a Beast. It's up to our opponent. We've set this Call of the Haunted, and they're going to normal summon out the Zephyros. They're going to swing in for 1,000 over our Beast, and then try to get in for direct with the Zephyros, but we're going to reborn the Green Baboon using this Call of the Haunted. We're going to find a reborn off the top and get ourselves a copy of Scrap Beast to the field, while then going this copy of Instant Fusion to make a Scrap Twin Dragon. We're going to go to Scrap Twin to get all of the monsters off the field except for the Scrap Twin before attempting to swing in for lethal, but running into that Forbidden Lance, keeping them alive for one more turn. They're going to find cards constant off the top. Another opportunity to get into something there. Find Foolish Burial, though, which is really not anything. They're going to set the Zephyros, praying we don't find a normal summon, but unfortunately for them, we do, and we're going to walk in for lethal. Bit of an unfortunate showing from the Dragoonity player there. Not finding the main play starters for their deck is just kind of unfortunate. But their opening hand here is looking significantly better with Bottomless, Terraforming, MST, Legionnaire, and Mistletoe into our Veiler, Instant Fusion, Thrasher, Maxi, and MST. You honestly could not even tell me that this is playing Scrap because we have not found a single Scrap card. So they're going to go first and find a Heavy Storm off the top. They're going to rip this copy of Terraforming to get themselves a copy of Ravine. Ravine is going to activate, pitching this copy of MST, and then adding themselves a copy of Phalanx. So they're going to do Phalanx to get this Mistletoe into hand while we go for a Max C. And we're going to get a handful of draws off of this on their way to a Stardust Dragon. They're going to hit this Bottomless and pass to us. We're going to find this copy of Veiler off the top before ripping this copy of MST into their Dragon Ravine, which is going to proc the Stardust. They're going to get the MST, and we're going to go for this copy of Thrasher and this copy of Monk. Monk is going to ditch this copy of Instant Fusion to get ourselves a copy of Scrap Beast. We're going to go for a Scrap Dragon. They're going to attempt to Bottomless our Scrap Dragon, and then we are going to chain the Scrap Storm to it to make sure that it goes to the graveyard instead of the Banishment. While we don't get the Scrap Dragon effect, we are going to get to bend a Chimera and get another draw for our trouble before swinging up to 21 as they reborn their Stardust. They're going to find a Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon off the top and then go for this copy of Ravine to get themselves a Dux, but we have the Veiler for that, so we're going to check that, and it's just off to them to go over our board over in battle. Back to us, we are going to find a copy of Maxi. We don't really need that right now, but we are going to go for a Chimera to get into a Scrap Dragon, and the Scrap Dragon is going to walk over the Stardust Dragon. Back to our opponent, who has found an Instant Fusion off the top, which does enable this Darkness Metal Dragon. We are going to go to this copy of Max C, just assuming they're going to do something. And then once we've drawn two, we're going to Bottomless that Red MD. And then they are going to rip the last card out of their own hand to get a copy of Atlas in rotation. They're going to go this normal summon of Atlas to go into a Vajrayana, trying to equip that Atlas to out our Scrap Dragon. But unfortunately, we do have this other Veiler in hand, which is going to stop that in its tracks. And then they are going to scoop it up, knowing that they can't really do anything from this position. I hope it's become obvious at this point that I do truly love this deck, even without Scrap Factory. I know it's not perfect. It's probably one of the worst decks that I've shown off in the month of Meadowlands, but honestly, sometimes you just got to talk about your pet decks, even if they're not all that good. I really do like the nonsense that this deck gets up to. I think the addition of the Green Baboon has actually helped a lot. And while we can't really go make a Gear Gigant X to get a Machina Fortress in rotation, I honestly do think that Green Baboon is at the very least, like, not the worst card in the world. It's certainly not, like, the best thing to be doing, and there's certainly maybe something better to be doing with Scrap in this format, but as things currently stand, I am pretty content with where the deck is sitting. There are definitely some things that I am still considering. I want to maybe find space for the Searcher because I do think that is a very interesting way of potentially outing a board. Honestly, I wish Scrap Recycler did something here, but unfortunately, its dump of a machine doesn't really do much for us because all of our main cards that we care about are like Beasts or Beast Warriors. So Recycler, unfortunately, despite the fact that I think it is not a terrible card, just does not really fit Scrap. I know there's a handful of other Scrap cards that have seen historic play, but I'm just really not sure on them. I know Shark, I think, is a card that, at least to my knowledge, has seen some kind of historic play, but I'm going to be honest, I'm really not sold on it. The rest of the Scrap, Spell, and Trap lineup, I think, is also maybe worth taking another look at, but if I'm going to be honest, Yard and Storm are kind of the two that I really, really care about. So I'm pretty content with things as they are for Scrap. I'm still going to continue to play it and just enjoy it in the casual tables because I do love it. But I am perfectly content with understanding that this is probably not a deck that is going to break into the Rogue Sheen, and it is instead just going to be a deck that is important to me. And you know what? That's okay. So with all that said, I'm going to thank you all so much for sticking around to the end of the video and watching through all of my nonsense and yapping about a deck that is realistically not all that good. We've still got some more Month of the Meadowlands to come, and I really can't wait for some of these. So hope you all stick around, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye!